It began high above the Solomon Islands in late 1942, where the blue expanse of the Pacific seemed endless and unbroken. Japanese pilots from the Imperial Navy's Air Arm were scanning the horizon, confident in the dominance their sleek Zeros had maintained since Pearl Harbor. Then, out of the glare, a strange silhouette emerged. It didn't look like anything in their manuals, nor like any American fighter they had faced before. Two booms, a central pod, a forked tail, the machine's outline was as alien as a mechanical bird from another world. The sun caught its polished skin, and for a moment, its form shimmered like a mirage. That was the first time many Japanese aviators saw the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. In Japanese briefings, early sketches of American aircraft had been circulated, but none matched this configuration. It wasn't a single fuselage. It wasn't conventional. And that made it dangerous. In combat psychology, the unknown often carries more weight than any technical statistic, and this twin-engine Predator was a mystery wrapped in polished aluminum. The Lightning had entered the Pacific War at a time when Allied morale was desperate for a symbol of change. Its designers had built it for high altitude and long range, but here, in the oppressive tropical heat, it carried another advantage: intimidation. Even before a shot was fired, its size and shape forced opponents to rethink their approach. Was it a heavy bomber escort? Was it a fast interceptor? Japanese intelligence officers scrambled to find answers, pulling apart reconnaissance photographs to study every rivet line. The first engagement told them one thing: it was fast. Blisteringly fast. Diving out of the sun, the P-38 could close in before a Zero could fully react. Its engines produced a distinct howl at high speed, a sound pilots would come to recognize and dread. When its guns opened, 4.50 caliber Brownings and a 20mm cannon clustered in its nose. The fire pattern was concentrated, precise, and lethal. In those early days, many Japanese pilots dismissed it as a curiosity. A one-off experiment that might vanish as quickly as it had appeared. But deep inside, others sensed it was something more. The way it hunted. The way it stayed locked on target even in sharp turns. The way it simply refused to be caught once it dived away. This wasn't just another aircraft. This was a new kind of problem. And for the Imperial Japanese Navy, problems in the sky had a way of rewriting history. By the time the P-38 Lightning entered the Pacific theater, Japan's air power was riding a wave of unmatched dominance. From the skies over China to the battles of the Coral Sea and the early thrusts into the South Pacific, the Mitsubishi A6M0 had proven itself to be an apex predator. It was light, agile, and, in the hands of veteran naval aviators, seemingly untouchable. Allied fighters like the Brewster Buffalo and the early P-40s had fallen in flaming spirals far too often. For Japanese squadrons, the message was clear: no Western fighter could stand toe-to-toe with them. This overconfidence was not arrogance without cause. The Zero's incredible range allowed it to project power deep into enemy territory, striking at airfields and shipping lanes without the need for immediate refueling. Its ability to outturn and outclimb opponents gave Japanese pilots an almost unfair advantage in dogfights. Victories came in rapid succession, and even when losses occurred, they were usually attributed to overwhelming numbers rather than superior machines. When the first reports of a twin-boom American fighter surfaced, many in the Japanese command dismissed them as exaggerations or field misidentifications. Some assumed it was a cumbersome bomber escort, fast in a straight line perhaps, but heavy and slow to maneuver. Others believed it was a coastal defense aircraft unsuited to long-range patrols. The idea that it could threaten the Zero's supremacy seemed almost laughable. Part of this miscalculation came from the American reputation in early war years. The U.S. had fielded capable bombers, but its fighters had not inspired fear in the way Japanese aircraft had. In the eyes of Japanese intelligence, the Americans were still learning how to fight in the air. The P-38's unusual design only reinforced the perception that it was experimental, a bold but flawed departure from proven single-engine concepts. In reality, the Lightning was a machine tailored to the very weaknesses the Zero could not fix. It could climb to altitudes the Japanese fighters struggled to reach. It carried armament concentrated in the nose, eliminating convergence issues that plagued wing-mounted guns. And with its turbo-supercharged engines, it could sustain high speeds where the Zero's airframe began to strain. But in late 1942, few Japanese pilots recognized this. They saw the Lightning as just another American machine that would be studied, outmaneuvered, and eventually destroyed like the rest. This underestimation would prove costly. In the months ahead, U.S. pilots would learn to play to their strengths, using the P-38's speed and diving ability to dictate the terms of every fight. By the time Japan understood the depth of the threat, the skies over the Pacific had already begun to shift in the Allies' favor. The P-38 Lightning had not been born for the steaming skies of the Pacific. Its roots were in a 1937 U.S. Army Air Corps requirement for a high-altitude interceptor, a machine meant to race toward enemy bombers over the American homeland. Lockheed's team, led by the visionary Kelly Johnson, answered with an unconventional twin-boom design wrapped around two turbo-supercharged Allison engines. On paper, it promised blistering speed, immense climb rates, and firepower concentrated in a razor-accurate nose battery. But when war broke out, the Lightning's first proving grounds were the colder skies over Europe. There, it quickly revealed a dangerous flaw: cockpit heaters that barely worked, leaving pilots fighting frostbite at altitude. Compressibility, a then little understood aerodynamic phenomenon, caused the aircraft to shudder uncontrollably in high-speed dives. It was a thoroughbred in need of taming. When orders came to send the P-38 to the Pacific, engineers knew the challenges would be entirely different. Instead of freezing winds, there was blistering heat. Instead of high-altitude bomber interceptions, pilots would be flying long hours over open ocean, often far from any friendly base. Modifications were swift and essential: improved cooling systems for the engines, better ventilation for the cockpit, and tropical filters to handle humid air heavy with salt. In the field, American pilots quickly discovered that the Lightning's long legs, a range exceeding 1,300 miles with drop tanks, made it ideal for the vast distances of Pacific combat. It could escort bombers deep into Japanese-held territory, reach remote island outposts, and still have fuel to fight and return. In a theater where running out of gas meant ditching in shark-infested waters, that endurance was a lifesaver. The first time Japanese pilots faced the adapted P-38 in combat, many underestimated its reach. They were accustomed to Allied fighters turning back early, leaving bombers exposed. Instead, the Lightning stayed on station, meeting Zeros head-on and then breaking away in vertical climbs the Japanese aircraft could not follow. The concentrated nose guns, 4.50 caliber Brownings and a 20mm cannon, tore through fragile airframes with a single, sustained burst. These early encounters left a mark. Surviving Japanese pilots began reporting the Lightning's ability to appear where it had no business being, engage decisively, and vanish before they could counterattack. This was not a machine that fought on their terms. It forced them to adapt or die, a shift that would unsettle Japanese air strategy for the rest of the war. In just months, what had been seen as a strange, possibly flawed American experiment was emerging as a predator perfectly suited to the Pacific's unforgiving battleground. And the Japanese would soon learn that the Lightning's greatest weapon wasn't just speed or firepower, it was the way it rewrote the rules of the hunt. By mid-1943, the P-38 Lightning was no longer an enigma to Japanese forces, it was a persistent nightmare. Reports from surviving pilots painted a picture of an adversary that seemed to erase distance and dictate the terms of battle. In the early months, Zero and Ki-43 Hayabusa pilots had tried the same tactics that had served them well against other Allied fighters: outturn the enemy, drag them into low-speed dogfights, and strike from tight circles. Against the Lightning, those tactics were suicide. Its pilots refused to be baited. They fought in the vertical, climbing and diving in long energy-sustaining arcs, using their weight and twin-engine power to maintain an advantage. A Japanese ace could win a turn fight against most single-engine opponents, but against a Lightning flown by a disciplined pilot, the attempt only left him vulnerable to the next high-speed pass. The Imperial Japanese Army Air Force began experimenting with countermeasures. Some squadrons shifted to multiplane ambushes, hoping to trap a P-38 by attacking from multiple angles. Others tried shadowing bomber formations at extreme range, striking the escorts only when fuel would force them to disengage. But the Lightning's range destroyed that plan, it simply didn't have to leave when expected. Psychologically, the impact was corrosive. Pilots began second-guessing visual contacts at long range, wondering if the distant glint of sun on metal meant a Lightning was already closing in. Some even mistook other twin-engine aircraft for P-38s and broke off early, ceding the fight before it began. The Americans, aware of this effect, leaned into it, flying patrols deeper than necessary just to sound out, and ensuring enemy scouts reported their presence where no fight was planned. In briefings, Japanese commanders emphasized that the Lightning could be beaten by forcing it into sustained, low-speed engagements. In reality, few pilots could lure one into such a trap without being cut down in the attempt. The P-38's pilots were trained to avoid ego duels and focus solely on the mission, whether escorting bombers, intercepting enemy reconnaissance, or hunting transport aircraft. As the losses mounted, an uncomfortable truth took hold in Japanese squadrons: this was not just a fast plane with heavy guns. It was a thinking adversary, flown with a discipline that stripped away their traditional advantages. In an arena where confidence was as much a weapon as bullets, the Lightning was eroding theirs day by day. By the time many Japanese units had adjusted tactics to cope with the P-38's strengths, the damage was done. The hunter had changed the hunt, and it was the Japanese who now flew with one eye always searching the horizon for those unmistakable twin booms. When the war ended in 1945, the wreckage of P-38 Lightnings lay scattered across Pacific Islands, New Guinea jungles, and the Philippines. But to the Japanese pilots who had faced them, the memory of those twin-boom silhouettes was sharper than any fragment of metal. In the immediate aftermath, U.S. forces recovered several intact Lightnings in territory once held by Japan. Engineers and aviators from the former enemy were invited to inspect them, a gesture that carried an unspoken lesson in how far aerial engineering had advanced. For many Japanese pilots, it was the first time they could study the aircraft up close. The long, sleek nacelles, the concentrated firepower in the nose, and the sheer scale of the Lightning all made sense now. In hangars, they walked around the captured machines in silence, some running their hands along the smooth aluminum skin, others peering into the cockpit to see the arrangement of controls and the view that had stalked them from the sky. Post-war interviews with surviving Japanese aces revealed a grudging admiration for the P-38's versatility. It wasn't the fastest aircraft in level flight, nor the most agile in tight turns, but its combination of speed, firepower, range, and climb rate made it a complete threat. Against the Zero, which relied on lightweight agility and short-range engagements, the Lightning's strengths were magnified in the wide-open skies of the Pacific. Strategists in the newly formed Japanese Self-Defense Force studied wartime reports on the P-38 as part of a broader reassessment of fighter doctrine. They noted how American pilots used energy fighting to avoid turning duels, how disciplined formations maximized the twin-engine fighter's survivability, and how psychological intimidation often preceded the actual battle. In training lectures, the phrase, "fight your fight, not the enemy's," began circulating, a lesson drawn directly from the Lightning's success. Even decades later, in memoirs and interviews, the P-38 remained a touchstone for Japanese veterans. Some recalled the shock of seeing it for the first time, others the frustration of never quite getting a perfect shot. A few, with characteristic humility, admitted they had underestimated it until it was too late. The Lightning's legacy went beyond its victories. It was a reminder that innovation could disrupt even the most established combat traditions, and that in aerial warfare, adaptability mattered as much as raw performance. For Japan, the P-38 was a symbol of how an unfamiliar design, one that seemed ungainly and unconventional at first, could dominate through a combination of engineering foresight and tactical discipline. As the last operational Lightnings were retired and restored for museums, their twin booms cast long shadows on the tarmac. To those who had once feared their arrival, the sound of those propellers spinning up was not just noise from a machine, it was the echo of a war where the sky itself had been rewritten.